I have heard that certain pieces of music, upon their first airing, could induce in the audience seizures, ecstasies, or death. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring prompted riots. The Glass Requiem prompted something else. Something that to this day, when the wind in the stairwell keens a certain way, makes my hands tremble and my throat constrict, as if I were again in that suffocating auditorium, clutching my program like a sacrament. The lights had been dimmed to a surgical hush, the expectant breath of the crowd little more than a ripple on the surface of a dark lake. I was at the center, quite literally, front and center, a gift from Director Velius after my service to the conservatory's collections, an attempt, perhaps, to tether my loyalty to this place, or to remind me how easily rewards could be revoked. Velius himself presided from the director's balcony, glass of aquavit raised like a tiny, mocking star. Alera's entrance should have been an afterthought. She was neither prodigy nor beauty, pale as parchment, chinless and twitchy, with a habitual flinch that suggested permanent dislocation. Yet after she settled onto the stage, it was as if the air in the hall grew weighted, charged, as if the molecules themselves gathered inward in anticipation. Some atavistic part of my brain recalled thunderstorms, the prelude to violence. The violin was wrong. I'd handled it in the archives, catalogued its impossible provenance, blown, not carved, from a single ingot of lead crystal, the scroll patterned after some long-extinct nautiloid. The strings, dear God, the strings, rumored to be spun from the hair of the composer's departed wife, though no such beast had that shade of gray. The instrument seemed to leach light from the air, and my stomach folded at the first stroke of the bow. The Glass Requiem cannot be described, only diagrammed. It opened with a motif just at the threshold of hearing, more resonance than melody, a vibration that found the fillings in my teeth and the scar tissue in my knuckles. It called to every fracture I had ever sustained and sang them open. The opening movement, Preludium Lacrimae, ran its crystalline claws up my vertebrae and nested at the base of my skull. It was then that I saw her in the third row, the same girl, woman, who'd haunted the alleys outside my flat, her face a smudge of grief and bleach. Her eyes, when they swiveled to meet mine, were the color of rain-soaked cement, and I could not for the life of me recall her name, or even if I'd ever known it. She did not look away, did not blink. The world shrank to a tunnel between the two of us and the glacial, grinding music. Next to me, someone began to weep, not the polite dampening of a handkerchief, but a chest-racking ululation, the type reserved for fresh, unsealed graves. The sound was contagious. A sob here, a choking gasp there, the audience dissolving into a chorus of grief and terror, even as they remained rooted to their seats, rapt and shuddering. I tried to stand. I could not. My legs were not numb, but paralyzed with a violence as delicate and precise as the music itself. Each note, each perfectly placed harmonic triggered a new needle of memory. My mother's feverish songs, my lover's last voicemail, the hollow clang of the prison bell. I tasted copper and dust. There was a moment, a series of moments, impossible to quantify, when memory and identity disassembled like lyre strings under too much strain. I was not a man, but a collection of hurts, resonating in perfect sympathy with the horror playing out on stage. Alera's face contorted, sweat beading on her scalp. The violin gleamed with a lightless sheen, and with each bow stroke I felt the sound burrowing deeper into me, anchoring itself. I saw the woman in row 3 again, double exposed now, as if she existed in several phases, her face sliding off its own axis. She smiled, finally, a movement quick and sly as a paper cut. The Glass Requiem crescendoed. The audience's spasms found a grotesque harmony. Ilara's knees buckled, but she did not miss a beat. I remembered then what Finch had scrawled in the manuscript's margin. Do not finish, final phrase. The warning of a madman or a test for the next unlucky performer. The answer arrived, not in words, but as a sensation of weightlessness, as if gravity itself had been tricked by the music into taking leave. Ilara reached the final measure. The violin sang, the glass shattered, and with that, something in the auditorium shattered too. Not glass, but the thin membrane that separated this world from somewhere far less kind. The sound, the scream, the memory of every single grief I had buried rose all at once, filling me, hollowing me, leaving me a vessel for that otherworldly echo. Afterwards, no one remembered what the piece sounded like. No one could hum a bar, name a note, or even describe the last moments of the performance, but we all remembered what it felt like, a vacancy, a new resonance in the bones, and the knowledge that the Glass Requiem, once played, is never unheard. Ilara's fingers seized mid-cadence. The bow tore sideways, producing a scream that rattled the rows of teeth around me, and she collapsed, folding inward like a marionette whose strings had snapped. The violin rolled from her lap, spun in a lazy arc, and cracked against the hollow wooden stage. The note that lingered was not a note at all, but the high, keening overtone of something released, a dying call of a thing that had been caged for too long. No one moved to help her. The concertmaster, arms glued to his sides, Director Velius, lips parsed in a rictus more grinning than afraid. In the aisles, people clung to each other like shipwrecked sailors searching for the sea. I found myself kneeling by the unconscious girl before I understood how I had gotten there. Her face was that of a statue, cold and drained, every muscle in silent protest. I touched her wrist. The pulse was frantic and arrhythmic, like a sparrow beating itself bloody in a locked room. Someone behind me moaned, a sound so defeated that it seemed not to come from a human mouth at all. They say trauma breeds community, that those who survive a disaster together are forever joined by invisible ligatures. But that night, as the paramedics wheeled Ilara out on a gurney, splitting the onlookers with the casual violence of a zipper, I saw only a crowd of strangers who would never again make eye contact for fear of what might echo between them. The inquiry was brief. Fatal arrhythmia induced by acute hyperventilation. A heart attack, they said, though she survived by a whisker. The instrument was swept into storage, and Director Velius insisted on a media blackout. Ilara would recover, but she would never play another note in public, not after the sounds she'd made, the sounds she'd conjured from the glass. I visited her once in the sanitarium at the edge of the city. The facility was old, with windows that looked out onto a garden of dead lilacs. Ilara sat in a wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, eyes trained on the empty bird feeder outside. There were fresh scars across her knuckles, as if she had tried to claw her way through invisible bars. I asked her if she remembered the concert. She blinked 3 times, then shook her head. For a long while, she said nothing at all, until at last, in a voice barely above the wind, she asked if the music had worked. "Did it open?" she said. "Can anybody hear it?" I wanted to say no, to offer comfort or even a lie, but the truth still vibrated in my bones, and the words stuck. She smiled, fox-quick and glancing, and pressed a slip of paper into my palm. When I returned to my flat, I unfolded the sheet. On it, Ilara had drawn a single measure of music in a hand I did not recognize. Below it, a phrase. "Listen carefully. There's something in the silence waiting to be named." That night, I dreamed the auditorium, empty and dark, every chair a rib in a great beast's cage. The stage was vacant, but the music echoed still, slow, relentless, a tide eroding the shoreline of what I'd once called myself. And somewhere in the wings, a woman waited, her face both familiar and lost to me, her eyes the color of deep water. I awoke with the sense that something had changed. The walls of my flat pulsed in time with my heartbeat, and every clock in the city ticked one note slower than before. When I closed my eyes, the music returned, not as memory, but as prophecy. The Glass Requiem had never been about endings. It was an overture, and the true performance had only just begun. Now, on bleak days, I hear it pressed between the creak of floorboards and the scrape of my own teeth, those intervals no luthier would dare tune, those negative spaces, the inward screams echoing from the old tunnels beneath the conservatory. I have tried to replace them with the drone of streetcars or the repetitive catechisms of my employer, but at night, as the city's electricity gutters and the pipes groan in their walls, the glass requiem worms back behind my eyelids in shards, every fragment sharper than memory. Ilara writes to me, still, unsigned notes, threaded through the bars of the sanitarium's mail slot, sometimes just a measure of silence meticulously rendered in pencil. The hospital says she is resting, but her handwriting grows stronger with each letter, its staff lines more rigidly defined, its slurs and accents more insistent. I do not visit. I have learned my lesson. Yet I cannot avoid the campus entirely. The archives require feeding, maintenance, retrieval, sacrifice. It is there, in the shallow catacombs beneath Ellenwood's oldest wing, that I first see the glass violin again. It has been moved, though I am the only one with key or cause to move it. There, in the sub-basement vault, someone has set out a wooden stool. The instrument lies on the seat, perfectly centered, its pearlescent belly upturned like a dissected bird. She sits beside it, her shadow, at least. It flickers at the edge of the sodium light, hunched and intent, fingers fretting air and the complicated ballet of a cadenza. When I call her name, the shadow stands. I now see that the tunnel's stone walls have a gentle camber, that if you speak even a whisper here, the sound bounces and multiplies, never truly fading, only receding into infinite repetition. I approach the stool. The violin's surface is smudged with fingerprints, as if something insubstantial had practiced here for centuries, leaving only the suggestion of touch. I plant my palm upon the glass. It is neither warm nor cold, but vibrates faintly, just at the threshold of perception. That night, I return home with the measure Ilara sent me folded in my jacket pocket. I pour myself a draught of something unnameable and stare out the window, watching the clouds clot and disperse over the city. I hold the measure to the pane, beyond my reflection, at the angle where streetlight meets tempered glass. I catch the blurred outline of the woman from the alley, her face still half unmade, still waiting for me to recognize her. I sleep poorly. My dreams are retuned. In one, I stand on the stage of an endless hall, every seat occupied by an exact copy of myself, each watching with flat, anticipatory hunger. I have no violin, only the bow, its filaments strung with pale gray hair. Each stroke across the air drags out not music, but words, as though the world itself is learning to speak through me. Each measure completes a thought, each phrase tightens a net. As I bow, faces peel away from the audience and begin to sing, a choral fugue of my own doubts and betrayals. By the end, the only member left in the audience is the woman from the alley, and she is not clapping but holding out her hand for me to join her in the darkness beyond the footlights. When I awake, I have not moved. My hands encircled the sheets, fingers locked in some unremembered gesture. On my desk, the measure Ilara sent me has replicated. Where there once was a single bar, there are now 4, then 8, each one more intricate than the last, some written in my own shorthand, some in a spidery script I cannot read. I do not recall writing them. The notation grows denser, nested, obsessive. Director Vielis calls me the next day, voice smothered by an abundance of silk and secrecy. There is to be another performance, he says, something hush-hush, a gathering of only the most essential staff in the director's residence. As the archivist who first catalogued the Requiem, I am to attend. I agree before I realize my own mouth has spoken. The night arrives sooner than expected. Vielis's house is a monument to taste and terror, each room curated to project both prestige and threat. I am ushered through parlors of taxidermied birds and halls hung with funeral portraits. At the terminus of a long, candlelit corridor, a group waits, a half-circle of faculty and donors arrayed about a single wooden chair. On the chair sits the glass violin. Ilara stands to one side, upright, hands at her back like a criminal before the firing squad. Her face is even paler, her hair unbound, her eyes huge and hollowed by sleeplessness. She does not acknowledge me. Vielis begins with a speech that is all apology and ritual, but I do not hear the words. Instead, I study the violin, how its surface ripples with interior storms, how the strings vibrate ever so slightly, even at rest. They expect me to play. I take the instrument. It is heavier than memory, and when I draw the bow across its bridge, the sound is not music, but the shriek of old windows giving way. No one signals me to stop. In fact, the audience leans forward, wide-eyed, hungry, as if each note were an act of penance or of violence. Ilara mites instructions at me, silent as prayer. I recognize the measure she sent me, then the next and the next. The music spirals, folding back upon itself, a recursion of agony and delight. Out of the periphery, I see the woman from the alley appear, not among the audience, but behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders, guiding the bow along its terrible course. I play until my fingertips blister, until the room warps and cracks, until our bodies are fused into the music and the music into us, a chain of cause and memory that refuses to resolve. When I finish, there is silence, but not the peaceable kind. The silence is thick, roiling. Director Vielis dabs his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. One by one, the others stand, unsteady, conscripted into a new purpose none of us will ever name aloud. I wish the story ended with that night. But all that followed, all that bled into the next days and weeks, had the quality of a farce staged by the blind. The performance ended, but something continued, an aftershock, a series of inexplicable events that grew in their accumulation from rumor to curse. The very next morning, half the staff called in ill. I saw Director Vielis slipping from his office in mid-afternoon, his face bandaged at the temple as if he'd cracked his own skull against a wall. In the break room, professors huddled in silence, holding cups of coffee to their lips, but never drinking, as if the act of swallowing awakened an old injury. Doors on the upper floors slammed at random, though the halls were empty. I watched as a senior instructor attempted to teach his theory class only to freeze in mid-sentence, clap his hands once, and walk out into the snow without his coat. They found him, eventually, several miles out of town, digging with bare hands at the frozen ground. Students fared no better. Practicing alone in their soundproofed cubicles, more than one claimed to hear an undertone, a low, glassy moan stitched beneath every phrase. A tradition arose overnight. No one played alone, not even for warm-ups. Practice rooms were quickly booked out in pairs, sometimes in silence, just to keep the presence at bay. As for the audience, those patrons and faculty and anonymous salarymen who had braved that first performance, I began to hear gossip of strange maladies. Sleeplessness first, then migraines, and then, predictably, obsession. The postman confessed to me, on his knees in the lobby, that since that night he had become incapable of listening to any music at all. Radio jingles gave him migraines. A hummed lullaby from his daughter reduced him to vomiting and tears. Instead, he'd taken to sitting in silence for hours, his hands working invisible chords on the kitchen table as if trying to conjure the lost sound from memory. I tried, at first, to ignore these superstitions. But then came the disappearances. A teaching fellow, a witless, cauliflower-eared man named Mercier, arrived at my office one morning, his eyes red and leaking. "You cataloged it, didn't you?" he said, voice ragged. "The manuscript? The violin?" I tried to brush him off, but he stood firm, trembling as if every muscle in his body were tuning against itself. "It got inside me," he said. "I can't turn it off. When I close my eyes, I see her, and she's playing it backward, like it's an undoing." He left me with a thumb drive full of audio files, each more garbled and static-riddled than the last. I listened to one, just once. The first 5 seconds were silent. The next was a scream. Not human, but not animal. A stridulation that left my ears ringing for days. Mercier disappeared the following week. His office was left unlocked, desktop still logged in, a single file open on the screen. 4 measures of the Glass Requiem played in reverse, the notes annotated with clawed, shaking script. Administration declared it a mental health retreat, but no one ever saw him again. By the end of winter, the Requiem had acquired a reputation so foul that no one dared speak its name aloud. The violin was recased, boxed, buried deep in storage E, but the rumors persisted. Late at night, a glassy resonance would echo through the plenum, and a cold draft would stir the feathered coats in the cloakroom. I took to working late, as if by owning the night I could tame it. But it was Ilara who haunted me most. Her silence, her absence became a wound. I read her notes until the graphite wore away, tracing the staves with my thumbnail, looking for the pattern that would restore her to what she had been, or at least explain what she had become. In the archives, I began leaving out fresh paper, and sometimes in the morning, a measure would appear. Never in my hand, never in hers, but in that same unfamiliar script. It took me too long to recognize the handwriting. It was Finch's. Soon after, the dreams grew bolder. I would wake to find myself sitting at my desk, the manuscript open before me, the glass violin perched on its stand, the bow pinched between my fingers. The room vibrated with the afterimage of a note not yet played. I tried to resist, to lock the office and hide the key, but every night I would return, like a loyal dog, to the same chair, the same piece, compelled to trace the measures as they grew more intricate, more impossible. Some part of me was glad to discover that this was not a curse sewn onto me alone. I caught Director Velius in the hallway one night, staring at a blank wall, his lips moving soundlessly. "Do you hear it?" he whispered, and without waiting for an answer, hurried away. Others were not as lucky. A cellist from the graduate quarter hurled herself into the river, her last words a muttered harmonic series. A pair of voice students were found at the city library, heads pressed together, both stone deaf. A cleaning woman on the 3rd floor quit without notice, leaving behind a closet full of mops
and a dozen sheets of music, all inscribed with only a single note, over and over, until the paper gone soft from pressure. None of it ended the way I thought it might. There was no apocalypse, no climactic vomiting forth of the dead from the earth. Instead, the city grew quieter. The streets emptied sooner. Neighbors lowered their voices. Even the clocks lagged, as if time itself was struggling to find its meter. It was not death the Glass Requiem awakened in us, but a hungering for silence so absolute it gnawed at the marrow. I keep the violin now, at home, locked in a trunk beneath the bed. I do not practice. Some nights, though, I hear it, faint but relentless, a fraction of a phrase, the echo of a bow drawn over glass. It is not the full requiem, not yet, but lately the measures that arrive in my dreams are longer, more coherent, and I wake with the awful knowledge that I am not merely remembering, but rehearsing. I wonder if the others feel this too, if we are not, all of us, simply waiting for the overture to resolve. The night before the next winter gala, I receive a final letter from Ilara. It contains no music, only a question, written in that same unnerving, angular hand. When you hear the silence, will you know what to do? Her signature is a single looping clef. Beneath it, a smudge. I cannot say for certain whether it is graphite or blood. I sleep poorly that night, but for the first time in months, I don't dream of the music. Instead, I dream of a room packed with strangers, all listening for something just beyond the hearing. The woman from the alley is there, seated beside me. Her hand is on my wrist. We do not speak, but I feel in her grip the anticipation, the promise. Whatever waits beyond the next phrase, we will meet it together. When I awake, I am humming. The sound makes no sense, a tuneless interval, a slip between notes. Still, I hum it all the way to the conservatory, feeling with each breath the last boundaries thinning and my body yielding to the resonance. It occurs to me only then that the Glass Requiem was never meant to be performed in isolation. It was never a solo piece. It is a duet, and the other player waits, always, in the world just beyond this one. I ready my bow and begin again. The first note slices reality cleanly in two. Somewhere, Ilara draws her breath, and with it I feel the city breathing too. The stone, the scaffolding, the bones of the dead beneath the music hall. All those haunted cells in the archive, all the locked doors and sealed cases, open in a ripple. On the glass violin, each measure compels the air to shiver, then the air compels the light, and the light dilates, flooding me with a sense of presence so total it scorches away memory and desire together. My hands are unsteady, but my bow arm is true. The cadence is not mine. Not anymore. The woman from the alley steps into the light. In this moment, she is named, and then unnamed, and then every name at once. Her expression is not of recognition, but of complicity. She is both accomplice and adversary, and the terror is how naturally I accept this. Her mouth opens with the music, and in the interval between the attacks, she whispers language into existence. I cannot tell if it is Latin or some guttural dialect older than syntax, but I understand her perfectly. Not alone. Never alone.
The concert hall fills, row by row, with the faces of those the music has marked. The cello girl, wet-haired and sullen, Mercier, jaw slack, tears cut in streaks through the dust on his cheeks, even Director Velius, blood still wet at his brow, bowing his head in mock penance. Each of them hums, not in time but in sympathy, like tuning forks discovering a shared frequency. I play on. Ilara, though miles away, is beside me, her wrists now free, her hands painting measures in the air with signature gestures I instantly recall from the very first time she played. The duet is a conflict and an embrace. I feel her rage and her longing, hear the echo of every humiliation the world ever forced her to swallow. It's an agony that tastes sweet, like metal and honey. She bends the melody off course and dares me to follow. I do. I have no choice. The Glass Requiem's central movement is a war between motifs, and as I force my way through its labyrinth and counter-melodies, the physical world begins to yield. The lamps of the room shudder and burst. All chromatic color is leached into a gray so pure it blinds. The air grows dense, viscous, and each breath is a sob. The music doubles, triples, cascading through octaves until the strings beneath my fingers liquefy. I move my hands anyway. I bleed anyway. The work must be completed. In the final cadenza, the audience stands, one organism, breathing and not breathing in a perfect pattern. The woman walks the aisles, her steps echoing, not in time with the music, but in time with my heart. When she reaches the stage, the glass violin fractures, not suddenly, not as an explosion, but with infinite patience, splinter by splinter, until the instrument is equal parts wound and weapon. Ilara's voice comes through the silence, clear and hopelessly bright. You hear it now, don't you? I nod. I release the bow. The last note is the absence of sound, the erasure of everything that came before, and for a moment the only thing in the world is the resonance that follows, a silence the size of a scream. In that silence, Ellingwood's walls dissolve. The city outside shears away its facades to reveal the ruined, predatory thing pulsing underneath. My body, at last, is a vessel for something that has no music, no voice, only hunger. The woman from the alley offers her hand. I take it, and feel not comfort, but completion. Time resumes. All around me, the audience is seated as though nothing happened. The woman is gone, soaked back into the dark. The only evidence is the glass violin. Hairline cracks crazing its surface, beads of my blood stippling its bridge. On the stage, I stand alone and watch the applause start and fade like a gentle surf. Afterward, at home, I find an envelope slipped under my door. There is no stamp, no return address, only a scrap of staved notation and a single line. You played it well. Now listen. I do. In the silence of my flat, in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, I pick up the measure and try to play it on my old wooden violin. The sound is missing something. The music left behind is thinner, more desperate, as if it mourns for the loss of what it once contained. But beneath the surface, I sense it. The glass note, the daughter tone, the new thing curling up from the silence like a seedling in the dark. It is not beautiful, not yet, but it is alive. Ilara writes again, but now her handwriting is stronger still. The measures more ornate, impossible even for a virtuoso to sight read. She is nowhere and everywhere, often glimpsed in the corners of the conservatory or through the lavish windows of the director's house or reflected in the shop fronts downtown, always out of step with the world. She no longer assigns her letters. I start to see her shadow in my own, mirroring my stride in silence. The city responds. The air is charged, day and night, with static and the expectation of something vast. The rivers freeze over, but below the ice, the water pulses in defiance. Funeral bells ring at odd hours, and the streetcars sometimes lose their route, looping circuits until all the passengers have vanished
or chosen to get off elsewhere. The Requiem has changed the city, and it has changed me. Sometimes, in the archive stacks or walking the main avenue at night, I sense that the barrier is thinner, that the two worlds, the one we name and the one waiting in the silence, have drawn closer together. I think of all the artifices of music and ritual as so much softening, so much prelude, and I know. Soon there will be another performance, longer and more complex, ensemble rather than solo. The audition for that orchestra is already underway, and I feel the invitation crawling through my veins. For now, I answer Ilara's last letter with my own. When the silence comes, I will join you. I seal it, leave it in the archives. The next morning it is gone, and 4 new measures have taken its place. The overture is endless. The city will never again be quiet. We are all now in the waiting. But sometimes, in the hour before dawn, I walk empty streets and catch a phrase of music leaking from somewhere below, staccato and alien, shaping itself to the city's pulse. And for a moment, I remember my own name, and I'm glad. The Glass Requiem, still growing, still hungry, is being played. I listen. I learn my part. And I am ready, when the time comes, to begin again. At first, it was confined to Ellingwood, the condition, the craving, whatever subtle infection the Requiem had loosed. Like a gas, inescapable and seeking the lowest declivation, it trickled downward, from the rarefied heights of the conservatory's practice domes to the city's cafes, wine parlors, and echoing tramways. I would overhear it, someone at a table picking out the theme on a water glass, a newspaperman whistling a 4-note phrase before biting down savagely on his own tongue. It was never the whole melody, never a full measure, only the suggestion of a motif, but the hunger was unmistakable, the need to recapture that impossible, obliterating sound.
Soon, it broke free of the campus entirely. Society women begged for scores at soirees, exchanging rumors and fragments like contraband gems. Men in silk cravats called upon the archives for a sight of the ghost manuscript. There was a surge in violin purchases. The city's most exclusive tailor was beset by reedy, narrow-shouldered men, all demanding bespoke evening wear and silvered cufflinks. Even among the old guard, the solemn, entombed orchestras, whose bones had yellowed alongside fastidious ledgers, there was an itch, a restlessness. Retired symphonists wandered the city at night, listening for the next iteration. And when it came, no one was surprised, not even the authorities. The police commissioner, tasked with restoring whatever decorum had slipped through the city's cracks, was a grotesque little man named Cargill. He reeked of cigars and cologne, wore his medals as if they were types of fungus, and kept an ear trumpet looped over one shoulder like a predatory mollusk. He stalked Ellingwood's halls for a month before the next performance, scribbling notes, interrogating students, peering at the statuary as if expecting them to confess. He eventually installed an observer inside the archives, a detective whose badge number was 000 and whose eyes were as black and unreadable as the keys of a practice piano. Detective Brandel announced herself with the discretion of a parade. She wore men's shoes, a moth-eaten bowler, and the kind of trench coat that suggested she might at any moment unfurl and become a storm system. She spent her days in the stacks, leafing through the oldest conservatory programs, marking passages with a red pencil whose sharpenings formed a blood-bright drift along the parquet. Her questions were often monotone, sometimes recursive. Was the violin ever played in the rain? Did anyone write down what the audience dreamed after? But now and again, her voice would sharpen to a clarity that pierced through all the music-mad haze. "Why do you think they keep coming?"
she asked me once as we sat opposite in the archive's frigid vestibule. The audiences, they know it hurts. They know it could kill. I had no answer. Or rather, I had 1,000 answers, all of them incomplete. I offered the one that seemed least unhelpful. For the same reason we cup a shell to our ear, even when we know what it will sound like. Brandel looked at me then, long and close, and if there was sympathy in her gaze, it was buried beneath the sediment of many sleepless years. "Do you ever worry," she said, "that what you're hearing isn't an echo, but a signal? Not the memory of the sea, but the call of something waiting in it for you?" I did not reply. She made a note and changed the subject. It may have been the detective's intervention or the inexorable logic of plague, but by the end of that semester, the city had entered a new regime. At night, the streets thrummed with a tension so keen it set the neon signs above the cafes shivering as if they belonged to some larger, struggling organism. The river, which in written histories was always described as sluggish, now ran slick and fast, dragging with it the scattered sound of every window pane and tram bell. Ellingwood's calendar overflowed with emergency recitals, debriefs, and most insistent of all, a hush-hush performance of the Glass Requiem by the city's hand-picked ensemble. The event was invitation only. I expected to be excluded, yet at the last moment a card arrived, monogrammed with the director's own signet. I knew better than to decline. Attendance was both a privilege and a summons. The concert hall, when I entered, was already electric with anticipation. Here were the faces of the city's old masters and hungry apprentices, university dignitaries, and scattered among them strange knots of people who seemed present not in body, but in some other, more desperate way. Gaunt society wives wrapped in bandages, a child dressed in mourning black, a priest whose thumb traced the shape of a clef over and over on his own wrist. They did not speak. Each seemed to listen intently to the music yet to occur. I saw Brandel, but not at first. She was near the pit, flanked by 2 constables with fists knotted at their sides, but her eyes were directed not at the stage, but at the ceilings, as if searching for cracks. Alara was nowhere to be seen, though I felt her, felt the chill that came of knowing that somewhere, not far at all, she was waiting for the downbeat. The performance began in the manner of all doomed things. Too fast, too eager, the conductor hunched over the stand as if to shield himself from the coming storm. The music itself felt thinner at first, as if terrified to propagate in so much haunted space. But then, as always, the Requiem's internal logic asserted itself, and the fractal harmonies began to multiply, each iteration drawing tighter the net around the audience's throats. I watched the ensemble, sweating, trembling, bleeding through their white gloves, and saw among them faces already lost to the world, hands that moved of their own will, bodies ghosted by a music that would not be denied. It was in the movement between movements, the breathless, corpse-white hush where the room held itself in abeyance, that the true change occurred. The child in black stood, walked aimlessly to the aisle, and with a singer's true pitch began to hum the next passage before the orchestra had a chance to play it. In moments, she was joined by the priest, then by a dozen others, some humming, some keening, some merely vibrating in uneasy sympathy. The sound was both a harmony and an infection. Even those in the audience who had sworn never again to subject themselves to that music found themselves drawn into it, compelled to reproduce it in gesture, in teeth gritted or jaws slack, in the tremor of their hands. When the last impossible cadence came, the glass of the chandeliers did not shatter, but rather melted, slumping into teardrop stalactites that hung trembling over the breathless listeners. The conductor dropped his baton. The ensemble slumped as one, spent and weeping. The audience did not applaud. They merely stood, forming a single, immense, silent chord. Brandel approached me at the end, when the others had filtered into the lobby, and the city's streetlights cut long, searching shadows through the high windows. She did not seem afraid, only grave, as one might before the shape of a storm on the horizon. Whatever this is, whatever is happening to your people, it's not just happening to your people. You need to prepare. For what? There will be another performance, and another after that. The city will fill itself with these until there's no one left to listen. You'll have to find a way to end it, or at least a way to make it stop echoing. I did not know then that Alara's final letter was already waiting for me, slipped beneath the office door and sealed with a wax clef. I did not know that Director Velius would soon be discovered in his office, hands pressed so hard to his ears that he'd carved furrows in the skin, mouth sewn shut with violin string. I did not know, but I should have. In the weeks that followed, the city's appetite for the Requiem did not falter. It grew. Each performance was more crowded, more desperate, as if some invisible tide were rolling in, dragging every upright citizen into its undertow. The children hummed it in the playgrounds, the old men whistled it in the bath, and late at night, even Detective Brandel could be heard pacing the archives, humming under her breath, the red pencil tapping out the time. What is the appeal of a music that ruins the player and annihilates the listener? Perhaps it is the oldest impulse, the hope that by naming a thing, by joining it in song, one can survive the encounter. Perhaps it is merely the lure of silence in a world that will not shut up. But I suspect there is another reason, one that Alara had always known, and that I, despite all my cataloging, had only begun to grasp.
In the world behind the world, there is a place where the music comes from. It is hungry, and it is patient, and every time we listen, it grows a little closer, a little louder, until someday, surely, the note will sustain and the rest will be silence. And so, when the next invitation came, unsigned, but bearing the odor of damp paper and graphite, I accepted. I readied my bow. I tuned the violin, glass strings now scabbing over with congealed blood and sweat. I went to the appointed place, a forgotten echo chamber beneath the city's founding cathedral, and found the congregation already seated, their eyes filmed with expectancy. At the front, waiting, was Ilara. Her smile was a knife, thin and bright. She offered me the Glass Requiem, its scroll worked all the way down now into a perfect spiral. I took it, and as I drew the bow, I knew, at last, the answer to Detective Brandel's question. We keep listening because the thing at the end of the music is not death, but something far worse, something we were always meant to join. The music began, the city held its breath, and we played. The first audience was rapt, the next was compliant. By the third, all resistance had liquefied. We played, and the city convulsed on our every downbeat and tremolo. Where once there were critics and skeptics, and those who believed in the hierarchy of taste, now there were only listeners, each willing, eager even, to be consumed by the sound. Even the weather learned its cues. A pulse of pressure swept out from Ellingwood at Curtin, and each night patched the fog a little closer to concrete, the mist vibrating in the odd intervals of the Requiem's second movement. There is a kind of victory in surrender, and Ellingwood's halls basked in it. Professors no longer taught from the old scores, but from eternally revised staves, each version more fevered and elliptical than the last. The director, if he was ever seen now, moved as if the air itself were conducting him. His suits, once black and precise, appeared streaked by something grayer than chalk dust, and his voice, if it surfaced at all, was a rasp, a suggested pitch at the lower bounds of frequency. The campus hired no replacements for the vanished. Instead, dossiers were compacted, rooms were annexed,
and a constant shuffle of the living and the not quite there kept the archives humming with a ghostly, perpetual productivity. The new students were of a different breed, sleepwalkers drawn to the archives by wordless rumor, savants who'd never touched a violin but could sight read in 4 simultaneous clefs. I watched them sometimes, out the window, pale, determined, and each, in their own way, already rehearsing for an audition they'd never wake from. But one morning, call it morning, though the distinction now was academic, a woman appeared at the glass door of the archive. She did not knock. She did not need to. Instead, she waited for me to notice, and when I did, I felt the violence of her expectation lance through the fog that usually cased my mind. She wore a hat with a clipped veil, and behind it her face was patchwork, part memory, part prediction, assembled along fractures I recognized even through the distortion. The alley woman, the muse of the first performance, or perhaps just another listener who'd sat too close to the stage. She moved with a measured, almost animal grace. When I let her in, the glass of the entryway rippled around her, an aurora of resonance. She spoke only once, her mouth curving around the word with the careful pressure of a surgeon's blade. Again. I did not have to ask what she meant. I led her downstairs, into the vault where the violin waited, still haloed by the old sodium lamp, still marked with the scars of the last recital. Beside it, the stool. I sat. She stood behind me, close enough for her breath to lift the hairs at my nape. Above ground, the city was silent, scoured clean by the Requiem's latest tide. I picked up the instrument. My hands shook, but only with anticipation. The music came without effort, as if it had never truly left me. Ilana's new measures curled and unfurled behind my eyelids, each phrase more feral, more ruthless than the last. When I played, the alley woman sang. She did not make a sound. Her song was one of movement, the flex of finger joints, the splay of her arms an echo of mine. The shadow chorus joined her, ghosts of everyone the music had ever touched. Mercier, the child in black, the priest, even Director Valius, his face a mask of pride and utter devastation. They filled the room, and the room became the city, and the city the world. The Requiem reached its new conclusion. The glass violin gnashed against my shoulder, blood pooling in the hollows where bone met tendon, but the pain was exquisite. It was at last the correct tuning. Where the music once gestured at an absence, it now made one. As the final chord decayed, the alley woman placed her hands upon my head and pressed gently down. My vision collapsed inward, reducing until it was nothing but the thin, silvered line of a string. And in that silence, boundless, absolute, I heard the stories of every soul the music had ever orphaned or freed. I awoke with the clarity of fever, in a city where nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The river still ran, but its sound was new and sentient. The trams rolled on, but no longer whined in the old, comforting register. Now each wheel strike was another interval in the great, unsayable score. The children hummed in queasy fifths. Brandel's red pencils had given way to rasps of charcoal, and the director's body hung from the proscenium in a perfect, silent pianissimo.
I found Ilara in the gardens, where no birds sang. She was alive, but she was no longer only herself. Her eyes had the glassy clarity of a violin's belly. She walked barefoot in the lilac bog, and every step left behind the shape of a note, sharp and infinite. When she saw me, she smiled. I smiled back. It was all we could do. The alleys filled, then, with music. Not the kind you could buy or teach or stomp out with state regulation, but the kind that moved, viral and viral, from the cracks in the pavement and the mouthings of those who had never known how to speak.
The world behind the world was open now, and the city pulsed in its own bloodstream, alive with loss and with the gnawing, paradoxical hope that the next note could still, somehow, redeem the last. You do not recover from the Glass Requiem. You learn to make space for it, in the cavity of the chest, in the sleepless hour before dawn, in the silence that feels newly, terrifyingly alive. If there is one lesson, it is this: what is broken will join with what is broken. And music is simply the way we remember what we lose. So I play, still, sometimes with Alara, sometimes alone, sometimes in the company of the alley woman when she wills herself back into flesh for a measure or two. The violin lives beneath my bed and, at intervals increasingly brief, demands to be tuned. The scars heal and then reopen in time with the city's pulse. There are fewer people these days, but those who remain are better listeners.